I'm Seth Grant with Sailrite, and in today's tutorial video, we're going to show you how to make this glass enclosure panel. And this has a canvas border, and it's a frown window. And it also has a shingled feature where the glass goes from the back of the panel over the front of the canvas, so that when water flows down, it just goes right off the front and can't go inside. You can just open it a little bit and have it hang open like this, or you could open it all the way. It's your choice. We have 3 different videos, each with a different frown window technique, and we're gonna go through them real fast, but you can find the links to the other 2 that you're not watching now in the description below. The first one has a zipper in both the glass and the mesh. So you can unzip the glass and you can unzip the mesh, or you could just have one of them up at any given time. The second technique is a permanent screen with a zipper in the glass. And the final technique is just a zipper in glass. So here's a pattern that I've made for my curve for the frowns portion of the zipper. And what I did is I measured 9 inches up, 9 inches over this way, and then I struck a line between those 2 points to complete a triangle. And then I found the center of that triangle right here, and I measured 1.5 inches up from there to create the shape for my arc. And then I just freehand drew this arc in with my white pencil and my white scribble pencil. And then I continued the arc a little bit downward. That way I'm not heading directly into a straight. So the curve will keep going before it hits a straight. That way there's no real turns. And I did the same thing over here. And now I'm going to take a pair of scissors and I'm going to cut on this curve right here on that dotted line. The curve over here doesn't look as nice as the one on this side, so I'm going to trim this a little bit just to make it a little bit more, make it lead into the curve a little bit more. So see, now it's a little bit more round. Okay, so for this window, one of the most important things is that you need to have at least 4 inches of window or of canvas on either side. So the 4 inches in from the outside is the max distance of your window. So if I wanted a 50-inch window, I would have to have a 58-inch piece of canvas in order to have the 4 inches on each side. Okay? And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark 4 inches in from our outside edge. So I'm going to use the minimum amount of required canvas. And I'm just going to mark a rectangle around this piece of fabric. So I'll mark here. I'll mark up to this 4-inch mark here at the top, because that's where I'm going to start marking over. And then I'll mark 4 inches across and 4 inches away, 4 inches from the top across, 4 inches from that edge down. I'm using a chalk pencil for this, and if I was doing this on an official panel, like for an enclosure, I would do this line lightly so that I could erase it at these top 2 corners later, because our arch is going to cover most of it, but these corners will be exposed. So I've taken my pattern for my arch, and I want to make it so that it's a gradual curve all the way up to the top, so that there's no sharp turns, and a gradual curve down here on the side. So this is a really nice position. I am going to mark this with my chalk, and I will be covering this mark later, so you don't have to mark it too softly. And just mark all the way over here to this top edge here. And then I'm going to take my marker and mark a little dash here and a little dash here, and I'll have to move this dash to the other side. And then I'll mark a dash here, which is right at where my mark ends. You can see it right there, and a dash there. So now I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to move this mark to the back side. So it's right there. And I will do the same thing with the mark over here. So it's right there. And then I'm going to take my clear acrylic ruler, and I'm going to measure from that top corner down to the beginning of my arch down here, and it's like exactly 10 inches. And then this way it is 10.5 inches. So I know that I need to mark 10 inches down on this side and 10.5 inches from the center. So 10.5 inches from here is right here. check that. Yep. And then 10 inches down from that top edge is right down here. And now I can position this arch so that it's in the same position going this way, so that both of the arches are even. The marks are matched up, so now I can mark this. So I'll just mark the same way I did before, all the way down and around this. So this is the top. Now we're gonna come down to the bottom and I'm gonna strike a line 2 inches up, and this will be the canvas for the bottom, because you need canvas at the bottom as well. So 2 inches up from that bottom edge, straight across. Okay, so now I'm gonna start on this side, and I need to mark another arch that is 2 inches away from the arch we just did. So 2 inches outside. I'm gonna go up to here because I know it's straight till there. And I will just mark all the way down. And I don't really need to go past this location right over here because this is for our glass. So right here, I don't really need to go past that. And then I'm going to use my sewing gauge, and I'm going to make dash marks that are 2 inches away from that curved line so that I can match it. And I'll do this all the way across the curve, and then I'll just draw a line right over them. So I'll go around all the way around this curve to the top, 2 inches away from that, do this one, and then come down here to the bottom. And then I'll show you what's next. And then when I'm finished striking these, I'll actually just connect the dotted lines, just like that. And these are covered by binding later on, so you don't have to worry too much about marking heavy, but obviously you don't want to go super, super heavy. I probably went too heavy down here, so I'm going to do everything else with lighter marks. Okay, so now we've struck 2 of the 3 arches. We still have 1 more to do, and the last one is for the location of the zipper. And that line that's for the location of the zipper is actually more of just a guideline that we'll put on here that'll make it easier to strike the zipper on both the glass and the mesh later on. Okay, so down here at the bottom, we're gonna mark a line that's 3/4 inches down from the bottom edge. This is the bottom edge. Make sure it's the bottom edge. And we'll mark it over here to this line for our rectangle on this side, and over to the rectangle on this side. So mark this all the way across. And this will be for our glass flap that'll go from one side of the panel to the other, that makes it like a shingle and sheds the water off. And so that's 3/4 inches down. Now I need to go 3/8 inches from that edge over and mark down like this. Let me get a little bit more chalk. So 3/8 inches over, mark like this, and then these are connected. So that'll actually be part of the glass that we cut out, and we'll do the same thing over here. 3/8 inch outside, mark over. And I will end up trimming some of this glass off later when I put on my facing. So there'll be a facing strip that covers all of this. But for now, I'm going to cut it at this size. Okay, for our last mark, it's going to be a 1/2 inch in from this outside line. And I'm not going to show you marking with the clear acrylic. I'm just going to show you a little tiny bit of this. It's the same process, 1/2 inch over, and then strike the arch with your chalk pencil. So I'll show you what's next when we're done with this. In this chapter, we'll be cutting our glass panel to size. Okay, now I have a heat gun, and what I'm going to do is this glass is actually in pretty good shape, but if you notice, if it was really wrinkled, I would use the heat gun and you can heat it up, and it flattens out really nicely. So I'm just going to show you a little example of that. And as you can see, this is already flatter than what it was before. Okay, now I'm going to take my glass and lay it directly on top of the canvas with the pattern on it. And I'm just going to take a sandbag here and stick it right here in the center. Okay, scribe ball pencil and outside lines. So first I'll trace around my excess down here at the bottom. This is the extra that will become our shingle. And then I'll trace around the entire perimeter of this pattern. So none of the inside lines get traced, just these outside lines. So all the way around that outside arc, and back down and around. Earlier, I think I said we're only marking the outside line, but that's not true. We actually have to mark this line too, and this is the line where the zipper comes up against. So I'm gonna mark this line as well around that arch. And obviously the bottom lines are already marked, so it's just the arch I'm marking. Okay, now I'm gonna take my scissors and I'm gonna cut on the external lines only, so the outside lines. Do not cut this inside line. This is for where the zipper is gonna be positioned. Just the outside lines. For this project, we're using Strataglass, which is a sheet good. Sheet goods are pressed and polished glass that have exceptional optical clarity, high durability, dimensional stability, and some have a protective scratch and UV-resistant coating, such as Strataglass and OC. Sailrite offers a wide variety of high-quality glass for applications such as this. Coming up, we'll be sewing the zipper to the glass. Okay, so now I have my glass laying on top of my canvas, and I'm going to take my zipper and I'm going to leave, you don't need much extra, just a little over an inch, and I'm going to run this along this inside edge here, and right here where the curve starts, so the curve starting probably about right here, I'm going to mark this zipper on this inside edge because I'm going to do a shrinking stitch all the way around this curved area so that the zipper has less wrinkles. So I'll just walk this around. And as you can see, the teeth are up. And when I get to the end of the curve, which is probably around here, I'll make sure they're the same on each side. So I'll make sure that the marks are in the same spot. Looks like I stopped this one right on top of that mark we made here. Can you see that mark right there? So I stopped that one right on top of that mark, and that's actually perfect for me. So I'll do this exact same thing on this side. I'll just mark this right on this mark. And then come down to the bottom and cut it off with about 1 extra inch of zipper. Okay, just take some scissors, cut it off about 1 inch extra down there, and we're ready to go do our tacking stitch around the inside edge of the zipper with the teeth up. So we'll show you that next. Okay, so I'm going to reduce my stitch length for this shrink up stitch on my zipper. So I'll reduce it down to like a 3.5 millimeter. And then I'm going to start on, I'm not changing my tension, I'm going to start on that mark. Okay, my needle's in the left position and my foot is right up against the teeth on the zipper. And I'm just going to sew from the mark that I'm on top of down to the other mark. And I don't really need to do any reversing because I'm going to have another stitch that goes over the top of it. And I'll just sew all the way to that next mark. And as you can see, what this is doing is it's pre-shrinking the zipper. So you can see the little waviness in it, and that is because the zipper is actually shrinking up, and this will go along that inside edge so that it's all shrunk up and it makes it lay flatter. I'm back at the table and I have the zipper, and I'm going to put the teeth facing down, so the underside of the zipper is facing up towards me, and I'm going to apply basting tape right up against this edge all the way down the length. Does not have to be exact. And I'll do this on both sides of the zipper, and then I'll show you what's next. So this is the shrunk up side on the inside. I'm going to remove the basting tape from the outside, so the side that we did not shrink up. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to match this mark up. See that mark? I'm going to put it on this line. That's my line for where the zipper goes, but this is the line that's we put on this mark on, so I know that goes right there. So right there, and then I'll just go right on top of that line. I am gonna cover the line all the way down here to the bottom, and then I'm gonna work my way all the way around this arch with the zipper right on top of that line on the glass. And this is pretty easy. So I'm going to change my stitch length back to a 6 millimeter. So I'm placing some Protect It down on the table. It has a really soft side to it, which is great for protecting the glass while you're sewing. I would advise putting something soft down, or else you could scratch the glass while you're sewing it. Okay, and I'm taping this Protect It to the table because I'm going to be sewing, and when I sew, I'll be moving the fabric towards the back. So that means it's only going to have a tendency to go towards the back. And I just don't want it to move out from underneath the fabric. So taping it just solves that problem right away. And now I'm going to start, and I will start down here at the bottom
on the outside edge over here with the foot right up against those teeth again. So the stitch is in the exact same spot it was in the first time. Lower the foot. I'm going to do some reversing here. So hold my trailers. A little bit of reversing, and then we're just going to sew around the perimeter, staying right up against those teeth. And I'm going to hold this part flat where the curve starts, just so I know that I'm right up against those teeth and I can keep my stitch in the same spot. Just keep sewing around the perimeter. This is pretty easy. Okay, now it's time to baste around the inside. So I'm going to peel up transfer paper, not all of it because I don't want it to stick to the glass ahead of time, but I'm going to lay this down flat all the way around the arch. And when it starts to get to the curve, I might have to put some little wrinkles in there, but the shrink up stitch definitely helps to add those, to shrink the material up so that it's easy to get it flat. You could also do it without the shrink up stitch, but it is more time consuming. And the goal is to keep the teeth as flat as possible. So I'm not worried if there's a little bit of wrinkling out here in that banding, but I want these teeth flat up against the glass. So that's my ultimate goal. So as you can see, I'm pressing directly on the teeth and then pushing towards the outside of the zipper to get it all flat. So this is an example of how awesome that shrink up stitch is. Here's the zipper we shrunk up around the inside edge. And here's a prototype I made of this window. I didn't complete it, but as you can see, look what I had to do to try to shrink the zipper up. And you can see, same size zipper, number 5, there's bubbles in the zipper. But with the shrink up stitch, nothing. It's like absolutely perfect. So that's how awesome the shrink up stitch really is for this type of a window application. Okay, same thing over here. I need to move my needle to the right though, because I want to sew closer to the teeth just like I did on this side. And then I'm going to line up the inside edge of the foot up against the teeth of the zipper. And I will sew around the arch, just like I did on the other side. Let's hold my trailer, otherwise it's going to pull out. And I'm going to do a little bit of reversing here at the beginning. And then I'll just sew around the perimeter. So I've got a utility knife with a nice sharp blade on it, and I'm going to be scoring the glass here so that before I sew the assemblies together, that way I can peel it apart once it's sewn together. So at the start, I'm going to score this deeply, so I'm almost going to cut through it. Well, I pretty much will cut all the way through it. So one deep score to start. So that looks like, yeah, there we go, we're through it. And now I'm just going to follow, you can see the middle of the zipper teeth, and I'm just going to follow that as my line all the way around the perimeter. And you do want to take your time with this because obviously this determines how the glass separates. So I'm going to go rather slowly, and I am holding down the glass with my other hand. And using a sandbag in this situation is not a bad idea either, because I really don't want this to move around on me. So just try to keep it still.
Next up, binding the glass. Okay, we just finished sewing our zipper down, and now we're going to take it to the machine and sew our binding on around the outside. I've installed a 1-inch binder with 1-inch binding, and I've switched the machine into zigzag. I'm about at 4 because I don't want the stitch to be too wide and miss. And then I've also reduced my stitch length to about a 3.5 to 4 millimeter. And I'm going to sew around the perimeter of this, just making sure that I feed the binding in, or the project into the exiting point of the binder. And we'll do a little bit of reversing here at the beginning. And then I'm just gonna feed it in there and sew around the outside. And then I'll show you what's next. And the reason I've chosen to do zigzag, because straight stitch would work as well,
I just chose zigzag because it guarantees that I won't miss the binding, and I also like the way it looks. So you could do zigzag or straight stitch, just make sure that you don't miss the binding on the bottom side, which is the easier side to miss. Now it's time to take the glass apart. So you can see this is the spot where I started the cut. So I'll peel the zipper apart a little bit here, and then I will just peel all the way around the perimeter on that score line to separate the glass from the glass sides from each other. Okay, and then I know that I can line the zipper back up perfectly even based on that end. So I'll just peel this all the way off, flip this back over, and then I will line this up, and I'll put a slider on this end going this direction and one on the other end going the other direction. So slider, just like so. And it's easy for me to work away from myself, so I'm going to try to get it in position. I like to have the panel out away and then work back towards my body. I think that's the easiest way. And there's a little bit of glass here, so it might be a little difficult. Okay, one side on, halfway through the slider. Other side on, halfway through the slider. What you want to do is you want to get them even there in the center of that slider, and that's how you get them on there the easiest. That should go on right there. See, there you go. They're nice and even. And I'll zip this all the way up to the middle over here. And I'll grab another slider. Coming up, we'll be binding the inside edge of the canvas. I'm cutting on this inside line all the way around the outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut really close to this bottom edge with a pair of scissors. So now there's a hole for my hot knife. I'm going to move this panel out of the way just in case. This precision cutting foot makes it so you don't need a cutting glass, but I also want to be cautious. I'll push this in here, and then I'm just going to cut on that line around the perimeter. Or not the perimeter, sorry. I'll cut on this line around the interior and then show you what is next. So up to the corner. Okay, I'm still set up in the same zigzag stitch that I was in for the outside of the window, but I've changed my thread to a blue that more closely matches my fabric, because now these stitches are going to show on the outside of our window. So I've also changed binding to the exact same color binding as the fabric. And I hot knife the end of this fabric because this is actually going to be the end. So I'm going to put this in here just like this. Actually, I'm going to stick it out a little bit more. And this is the inside of the window, or the window. So this is the bottom that I'm holding up towards you. So I'm going to sew around the frown, around this frown with binding. So I'm going to end up starting down here at this bottom corner of the frown. I'm going to stick this in here and get that binding right up against that bottom edge right there. Okay, and I'm holding it in with this. I'm going to push it in with a screwdriver a little bit here, and then put the foot down. So hold the screwdriver on top, put the foot down so that it's fed in there nicely. And I'll do some reversing to get down to that bottom edge. So I'm not really starting the binder until I get to this upper point. So I'm putting this in by hand almost. Okay, hold the trailer. And I'm going to do cut stitch forward and then reverse down to the bottom of that and then start going forward again. Okay, and then I'm just feeding it in just like I did the window and binding around this. And you could do this in a straight stitch as well. I'm using a zigzag because I think it looks better and it catches more of the binding. And I'm going to check my stitch. Stitch looks great. Came down probably a little bit shorter than I would have hoped. I probably should have started a little farther down there, but it should be covered by our facing, so I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, so I'm coming up to the end here, and I want to have the binding finished right on that edge, so I can actually just match these up. So I'm going to match up these two edges, so you see that? I want the binding to end right there too. Okay, so I'm just going to cut it right there where those two panels meet. And you could hot knife that edge as well. And then I'm just going to take this and finish feeding it into the binder. Make sure you don't sew through any of this fabric underneath. Okay, just feed it all the way through. I'm getting caught on the binder on the underside. Then look for the end. When you see the end, that's the stopping point, and then do some reversing there.
In this chapter, we'll be sewing our glass to the canvas. Now you could zip this slider all the way off so that you know the zipper is perfectly even, and then put it back on and then put one on this end. But since I know that the ends of the zipper are perfectly even when I started, I'll just make sure they're perfectly even when I put this on, and it'll work really well. So just get it in there, make sure the sides are even, and push it on there. There we go. Zip it to the center. And you can tell everything's fine because, as you can see, there's no big bubble there in the zipper. So this is the zipper side up. I'm gonna put the zipper side down. And then I'm just gonna take some basting tape and put basting tape right in the center of this binding, all the way around to the other side. And then I'll show you what's next. Okay, I'm going to use the Sailrite Canvas patterning ruler. Okay, so now I have the canvas back on the table, and this is the side I marked facing up towards me, and I'm going to use that as a guideline for where I put this down. So I'm going to go ahead and put this down on top, and I'll start peeling off a little bit of the transfer paper for the basting tape here so I can get started. And I'm going to align this bottom corner up. So see this bottom corner down here? I'll just line that up because I know that's right where I plan on cutting the glass. And I will start basting all the way around the perimeter. And I'm also going to pay attention to the amount of fabric on this inside edge. So you can see this blue fabric here, that's how much fabric is going to cover the zipper. So I want to try to get that as even as possible. So I'm just going to work this around the perimeter, trying to make it all even and squared up, and get everything to lay flat. This window is pretty small, so yeah, it'll probably come unbasted a little bit, but I'll be able to sew most of the way around before I have any problems. If you had a large one, it might come unbasted, so you might want to put some match-up marks on there. So just mark a little bit every probably 8 or so inches, and now you'll be able to match it up no matter what happens. So now we flipped it over and look at this side and make sure I can't see any of the zipper from underneath. And it does look like it's up a little bit over here, which means I probably need to flatten this panel out a little bit. So as you can see there, now it's much flatter. And I just do that anywhere where I had any issues. We're ready to, so I'm going into a straight stitch with a 6mm stitch length. I'll move my binder back. I still have the protected on the table. And I've rolled this up a little bit so that it's over here so that hopefully it doesn't come, not only doesn't come unbasted, but it doesn't get stuck on the corner of the table, because oftentimes you can get this part stuck on it. Okay? I'm just going to start sewing down here at this bottom edge. And I'm using blue thread for this, so yeah, you'll see the blue thread on this binding, but the outside is what matters to me most. So I'm just going to make sure everything's in place, my match-up marks are still in the right spot. And I can see it's pulling away down here a little bit at this bottom edge, so I'll move it back so that the glass is even with my marking, because I do not want it to pull away like that. Okay, now I've gotten it all nice and flat. I'm just going to sew just right in the center of this binding, so I'm just basically right down the center. And I'll just do some reversing here at the beginning. Then just start sewing around it, making sure I stay in the center of that binding. And if you need to make adjustments, bury your needle before you do so. I can see here's my next match-up mark, so things are still staying together properly. In this final chapter, we'll be finishing the bottom edge of our glass. So we're back at the table here, and I'm going to trim off this zipper because I'm going to be covering it with binding here in a minute. So I'm going to trim it so that it's almost flush with this edge. And then I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to cut into the glass right at where the bottom of this binding is. So you see across this bottom edge, and I want to cut
right to the edge of where that binding is in the glass, no deeper, just like that. And what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to end up pushing this to the back so that we can create our shingle effect. And I'm going to do the same thing over here on this side. So I'll pull this one back to the front because obviously it's easier to cut when I can see. Okay, so now I'll take the glass, push it to the front of the panel, just like that. Same thing over here on this side, push it to the front of the panel, and then I'm going to flip this over and I'm going to trim off all the excess that I don't need. So here I'll trim this so that it's a little, like basically flush with. Here I'll trim this so it's like just inside the edge of that binding right there. Same thing on this side. And then I'm going to trim off, I have way too much glass down here at the bottom, so let's see how much I'm going to need here. I'll take this and I'll show you on this side. So I want to cover this fabric under here as well as the edge of this binding. And I'm going to put this binding on both sides as a facing, just like this, all the way across. So I'm going to trim away like more than a little bit more than half of this glass here on this bottom edge. Now I'm going to hot knife the end of this binding just to make sure the end is sealed, because this will be left raw. You could fold this back if you wanted to at the end over here. Like you could fold this back like this, but I prefer to just leave it like that and hot knife it. And now I'm going to take the binding and I'm going to put basting tape, 2 runs of it, 1 down each side of this binding until I have enough to go across the bottom edge of this window right here. Okay, and then I'm going to take this. This is the hot knifed end. I haven't hot knifed the other one. I just cut it with a few extra inches. I'm going to get both of the transfer papers peeled off, filling the glue, and then I'm going to baste this on so that this comes just slightly past that binding there at the end. Make sure that it covers the binding on the glass too, so I need to go up a little bit right there. And then I'm going to baste it on so that it's nice and even across, level, as in straight line across this bottom edge. Okay, come over to the other end, and I'm going to cut off this excess, leaving a little bit of excess over the edge of that binding, just like I did on the other side. And then take the hot knife and touch the end of this binding to seal it, just like that. And there we go, and now we're ready to work on the other side of the window. Now I'm just looking at that bottom edge to see if it looks straight, and it does look straight, so I'm going to turn it over and work on the inside of the window. And what I'm going to do here is pretty much the same thing. I'll seal the end of this binding, and then I'm going to run basting tape down both sides of it till I have enough binding to go from this edge all the way over to this edge. Okay, now I'm going to put the binding on so that it goes a little past this end, and I'm using blue binding. I know this is the inside, but I like to finish it with the blue binding because I'm going to use blue thread and I want the thread to blend a little better. I know I use blue thread here, but that stitch is on the outside, so it's important that it blends. Okay, starting a little bit over this edge, and now when I get to this point, I'm going to line this up so that it's right on top of the binding on the underside, so that they're perfectly aligned all the way down this length, and then go a little over that end, hot knife it or cut it with scissors, and then hot knife that as well, and then we'll be sewing. Okay, so before I sew, I'm going to sew a zigzag stitch all the way around this binding, so top side and bottom side. And before I do that, I'm going to tack down these zippers so that I know that the material is not going to slide off of it when I'm sewing the rest. So I have my needle in the left position, and I'm sewing a straight stitch, 6mm, and I'm just going to do a bunch of reversing over this zipper. And I'm just going to bury this and cut the thread since I didn't have it through the center foot. There we go. Sew across it. Reverse back the other way. And back one more time. Then I'll do the same thing to the zipper on the other side. There we go. And that zipper is tacked down well. So now I'm going to go back to the center position so I can switch to zigzag. I'm going to zigzag at a 4. So So right there at a 4, and then I'm going to reduce my stitch length down to about a 4mm stitch length. And then I'm just going to sew two zigzag stitches, one across this bottom edge and one across the top edge. I'll start with the top edge first, since it's the more difficult of the two, but both of them are relatively easy. So I'm just putting the edge of the binding on the edge of the outside edge of that center foot. Hold my trailer. And I'll do a little bit of reversing here at the beginning. And then just sew all the way across. And when I get over to this end, I'll sew up to here, do some reversing, and then I'll start back on that side and sew another stitch on this bottom edge across and do reversing at this end. And I'll also do reversing at the beginning. So same thing on the bottom edge of the binding.
Our frown face window is now complete. For a list of the materials and tools we used in this project, check out the description below. Be sure to subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when new videos become available. From all of us here at Sailrite, thanks for watching.